My fingers drummed impatiently on the table. I stole a glance at my watch and saw that the time was quickly approaching. If it were up to me, we would have left here already. Of course, if it were up to me, I wouldn't be in this position. I looked at my glass. Empty. As for his glass, well, let's just say he's been sipping beer for half an hour. My fingers continued to drum impatiently when I suddenly felt her hand on mine. Her thin fingers held mine. The touch of cool skin calmed me. I turned to look at Michaela, who looked at me as if to say, "I know, just a few more minutes." What she actually said was directed at the man across from us. "We're so glad everything turned out so well, Mr. Hume," Michaela said. "Matt, if you don't mind." "It's all thanks to you," he replied. "Actually, there are two of us," she said, turning to me. "Nate worked hard on this." He said, barely sparing me a glance. However, the client seemed ready to eat it. Michaela was a beautiful girl, but for this particular meeting, she also decided to wear an attractive and tight red dress. It was quite modest in some respects, knee-length, with just a hint of cleavage, but it still turned a lot of heads. Michaela always tried to dress well for her clients. We went on this trip together to complete the contract. The contract was concluded, signed, sealed, and delivered. But, as is often the case in this business, the chatter doesn't stop. It's not always that bad. Some of the clients had a lot of fun. On the other hand, this guy was most interested in mentally undressing Michaela. "You're lucky, Nate," he told me. "What do you mean, Matt?" "Great job, beautiful, life can be worse." Michaela and I exchanged glances before laughing. "We are not a couple." "I'm married," said Michaela, flashing her wedding ring. "And not with me," I quickly added. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I was just guessing from watching you guys last week. You two were inseparable. And all these common views, common food. I even saw you adjust his collar, Michaela." "I just want my colleague to keep a close eye on our most important client," Michaela laughed. "If I were your husband, I would be jealous of this," he said, pointing at me before adding. "Or vice versa." He let out a choked chuckle as Michaela and I faked smiles. This last joke hit me too deep. Looking at Michaela sitting next to me, sipping the rest of her wine, looking as chic as ever and smelling as great as ever, it was hard not to fall in love with her. And after working with her for the last couple of years, I fell in love. This was our first business trip together, and although we spent most of our time immersed in paperwork and cozying up to Matt Hume, I had to admit that there was something very tempting about spending an entire week together, eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner together, spending hours on end in each other's company, and more than once staying late and drinking a few glasses. The illusion dissipated only when we returned to the hotel and went to our rooms. I've been married for a year now. I heard Michaela's voice when I finally woke up from my dreams. "What about you, Nate? Married?" Matt asked me. "No. But if you get down on one knee, Matt, I'll think about it," I joked. Matt laughed again. I felt Michaela's hand on mine again, but this time she turned my wrist so she could see my watch. Her eyes widened for a moment before she turned her customer face, as she calls it, back to Matt. "Well, Matt, it was amazing. But if Michaela and I want to catch the plane, we better hurry," I said. "Nonsense. You'll only have one more bottle left," Matt said, slamming his hand on the table. "That's generous, Matt. But the office will go crazy if we make them pay extra expenses. I am a client, and the client is always right. Give me an invoice." "What?" "Tomorrow you will board the plane. Give me an invoice, and I'll pay the costs." "I'll tell your boss right now," Matt said, pulling out his phone. Michaela looked at me pleadingly. She didn't want to be here any more than I did. I knew I had a choice, but I didn't know if I wanted to take it. But when I looked at her, and she looked at me with her eyes, I could not resist. "Well, Matt, I'm more than happy to stay here and have a drink with you under the table, but I'm afraid it'll be just the two of us. Michaela won't be able to join us." If Michaela was embarrassed, she hid it well. As for Matt, he could barely hide his disappointment. "She's rushing to her father's 60th birthday party," I explained. "Michaela's father turned 63 months ago, and she turned and stared at me. I ignored her and kept my eyes on Matt. "Oh, you're a good girl." Well, I can't stand between my daughter and her old man's birthday, he said. I turned to Michaela and said, "See you at work on Monday." Michaela smiled widely and gently placed her hand on my forearm before grabbing her purse and standing up. I turned to Matt and prepared myself for what could potentially be a long night, unless my gamble paid off. I looked closely at Matt and could almost see the gears moving in his head. Suddenly, he shook his head and said, "Ah, you better go with her, Nate. You are a good man offering to join me, but you have a more important role as a young lady's escort." I sighed to myself with relief. Outwardly, I said, "Are you sure? After all, today is Friday. I'm always ready for a drink." "Ha! I like you, Nate, but next time, don't wait for me to finish. You better hurry up." We quickly said goodbye and rushed to the door. I didn't realize it, but Michaela was looking at me the whole time. I didn't notice this until we went outside and stopped a taxi. "What? You're a really good friend, Nate." "What are you talking about?" I said, encouraging her to continue. "Were you really going to let me go and stay here with him?" "I knew you wanted to go home." "Yes, but it was very nice of you." "Thank you," she said, looking me straight in the eyes. Just looking at her made my knees almost buckle. "It's okay," I replied casually. "Are we really late?" "Not if we hurry. We'll go back to the hotel, grab our bags, check out, and then head to the airport." "Right. It sounds good. Do you think we can do it?" "Yes, don't worry, we can handle it." Nothing worked out for us. "What?" Michaela exclaimed. "From here, I can literally see the plane. But they won't let us in. The doors are closed. We missed him." "No. What do we do?" "The lady at the counter checks when the next available flight is." "Are you kidding me? Do you have a better idea?" "No, I'm just upset. The plane is right here." Here it is," I said, as we watched the plane move away from the terminal. Frustrated, Michaela sank heavily into her chair in the departure lounge. I looked at my watch. It was already late. I looked outside and saw only darkness. The sun has long since set. It seemed almost impossible for us to get on another flight today. As often happens in such circumstances, I began to pace back and forth. "What are you doing?" "Sit down," Michaela said. "I don't want to." "Why?" "Because I've spent enough time with you this week to know that I need to give you space when you're like this." Despite everything, Michaela grinned. "Sit down," she said in a softer tone. I smiled, took my bag off my shoulders, and sat down next to her. Michaela said, "I should have listened to you. We shouldn't have had lunch with Matt. No, you were right. After all, he is a client. No, you just wanted to have a quiet drink together. It would be much better than having lunch with him. I thought he was quite rude to you." "Of course, but of course," I answered, chuckling to myself. "What does it mean? Does this mean you drink in this dress?" He got ideas. "What's wrong with my dress?" she said, smoothing out the wrinkles on the thin crimson fabric. "You look too cute," I said, choosing my words carefully. "And what? Do I need to spell it out for you? He is a horny old man, and you are an attractive 20-year-old girl." "Ugh, he is married." It wouldn't have stopped him. "I'm married," she said indignantly. "And I'm guessing that's one of the many reasons why you wouldn't sleep with him." "One of many," Michaela laughed, agreeing. "Then your hubby can rest easy." Believe me, he is not calm. I frowned in confusion. Michaela noticed the silence and turned to see my expression. She took a deep breath before grinning to herself and saying, "I've told him about you more than once." "What, in general or just this week?" "Both. I mean, we talk a lot at work anyway, so naturally you're involved in conversations. But this week, because of this trip, you just became close. I think he's starting to get a little jealous." "Why? It's not like we're sharing a hotel room or something." "No, I know. But yesterday I told him on the phone that we had dinner every night and that we understand each other well." He literally responded by asking if you had a girlfriend. Well, you won't catch me feeling sorry for your husband. Michaela chuckled before pausing to consider my answer. What are you talking about? Before I could respond, we were interrupted by airport staff. Sir, I'm very sorry, but there are no more flights on this route today. Damn, Michaela muttered next to me. When is the next flight? I asked, getting up. Tomorrow afternoon. Would you like to order 2 seats? I turned to Michaela, who sat with her arms crossed over her chest, silently seething with anger. The brief mirth, which I had managed to revive, disappeared, and she returned to that gloomy mood, which I so hated. Michaela? I asked carefully. She nodded slightly. I turned to the employee, who immediately left to organize everything. I sat down next to Michaela again, but didn't say a word. I certainly didn't take it personally that she was so angry about the whole situation. Fun and games aside, it had been a very long and hard week. And while I might have found joy in being able to spend so much time with the girl I'd been so deeply in love with for years, I suspect Michaela wasn't impressed. It had just been a long week for her, made a little better by the presence of a good colleague. Maybe we can go back to the hotel? I asked finally. We can't do this, she exclaimed, more out of disappointment than anything else. What? Do you want to spend the night at the airport today? We have already handed over everything. They will give us rooms again. We left just a couple of hours ago. Michaela snorted loudly and crossed her arms over her chest. Given my feelings for her, I'd be lying if I said the idea of spending more time with her didn't excite me. Although for obvious reasons, I hid my enthusiasm. Okay, we'll be back, Michaela moaned. Are you kidding me? Michaela blurted out. After the airport, she was in a disgusting mood. She refused to look at the concierge or me, which was probably for the best because a smile appeared on my face. We just checked out. Of course, the rooms couldn't already be filled. These rooms were booked several weeks in advance, the concierge explained. Your room is still free, but hers is not. I turned to Michaela and slowly asked, So? I'm not going to share a room with you. Let's go to another hotel, she interrupted. Do you want to go from hotel to hotel until we find a place? What are you going to do? Michaela, it's almost midnight. I want to go upstairs and sleep. Michaela gave me a disdainful look, causing me to add, I'll sleep on the floor. You can take the bed. That's very nice, she said with a weak smile, softening slightly. But I just don't think it's a good idea. Listen, we will do whatever you want. If you want to look for another hotel with 2 rooms available, let's do it. Otherwise, give me a pillow and I'll make myself comfortable on the floor. She looked at me for what seemed like an eternity before she finally nodded silently. I smiled mentally before turning back to the concierge. By the time I took the access card, Michaela was already walking towards the elevator. We stood in silence in the elevator. We walked down the corridor in silence. They entered the room silently. It was approaching midnight, and we were both exhausted. I at least found some amusement in the current situation, but it was obvious that this feeling was not shared. Michaela didn't say a word, even as she pulled back the sheets on the bed, opened her suitcase, and took out her pajamas. I timidly approached the bed, silently grabbed one of the 4 pillows, and stared at the floor. Michaela, perhaps finally admitting that this wasn't an ideal solution for me either, muttered, Do you need a blanket? Or maybe we'll ask them to bring another one. No, it's really warm today. I'll be okay. Okay, I'll go take a shower. Do you want to jump into the toilet first? No, you go ahead. I'll just fall apart. She nodded, rolled up her clothes and a towel, and went into the bathroom. I muttered, I'm going to crash on the floor of my hotel room. Michaela could only grin weakly in response before adding, Thank you, Nate. You are a good friend. Having said this, she disappeared into the bathroom. Perhaps it was for the best, because if she had stayed to watch my answer, she would not have seen my smile turn into a bitter expression. Someone else would say I might be delighted. The bitterness was only intensified by the fact that the girl I liked was so unattainable. The fact that I heard the shower turn on and began to imagine her stripping naked and stepping into the hot stream of water running down her smooth, pale skin didn't help. There was nothing but a rather flimsy sliding door separating me from a naked and apparently very sexy Michaela. Alas, I stood stupidly in the middle of the room and felt the beginning of a very strong erection. It is not clear how to deal with it in these circumstances. Taking a cold shower was impossible simply because Michaela was inside said shower. Perhaps this whole missed flight and hotel room situation could be more trouble than it seems. This feeling only intensified when I threw the pillow on the floor at the foot of the bed and tried to get comfortable on the hard, cold floor. I lay on the hard surface for a while, listening to the murmur of the shower. Eventually my mind went blank, and I just waited for her to come out. I knew she would be fully dressed, but I waited with bated breath to see what she would wear to bed. I received my answer after what seemed like 10 or 20 long minutes. She stayed there quietly for several minutes. From time to time, the tap would open and I would hear her brushing her teeth or making some sounds. But otherwise, I just lay there and waited silently. When she finally came out, she was wearing tiny shorts and a thin t-shirt. They were pretty worn and faded with time. She was so casual, so homey, and for some reason she turned me on more than if she were in her underwear. Coming out of the bathroom, she looked down at me and smiled quickly before climbing onto the bed and asking, "Can I turn off the light?" To her. With these words, she turned off the nightlight, and we were left alone in the dark room. "Good night," she said unexpectedly cheerfully. "Good night." For a second, I listened silently as she fidgeted in bed, trying to get comfortable. After a few moments, the silence became deafening, not only because it was night and we were about to fall asleep, but because it felt like we were both holding our breath and very aware of the other person. After a moment, I asked, "Hey, Michaela." "Yes." "Will you remember the time when we rented a hotel room together?" She moaned loudly. "I knew you would make it problematic." "Come on, this is funny. Relax, I'm not writing this live. This could be our secret. It would be better this way. Good night, Michaela." "Good night, Nate." It's hard to explain, but it seemed final. It was as if we had finally said our last words and could finally fall asleep. I tossed and turned on the hard floor, trying to get comfortable. The thrill of the situation was gone, and now the thought of trying to sleep on a hard, unforgiving surface almost made me wish we had separate rooms. I shifted into different positions and closed my eyes each time, only to awkwardly turn around 5 minutes later. After what seemed like an hour, I reached for my phone and discovered that less than 20 minutes had passed. This night promised to be long. I listened carefully and heard Michaela's quiet breathing. I dared to sit up briefly and try to see her from the foot of the bed, but I could only see a motionless figure under the covers. I lay down again and stretched heavily. I closed my eyes again, only to open them a few minutes later, still no closer to sleep. At that moment, I began to think about Michaela and me and the long road that brought us here. At that time, we had known each other for more than 2 years. I remember how we initially had a cautious but fun conversation in the office when we first got to know each other. Then, being placed in the same work group, we got to know each other a little better, and there was a slow realization that with every new side of her that was revealed, with every personality quirk, with every hobby, with every little thing, I realized that this girl was perfect for me. I still remember the crushing feeling when I found out that she had a boyfriend. It was almost as bad as when I heard shortly after that she was engaged. I wasn't invited to her wedding, which was probably for the best. But since then, we have gotten to know each other much better. And while I wouldn't call us inseparable these days, more than a couple of people have commented on how close we seem at work. "Are not you asleep yet?" she suddenly asked, interrupting my train of thoughts. "Yes," I answered with unexpected eagerness. Suddenly the light came on, forcing me to shield my eyes from the blinding light. "Damn it! Turn it off, please. I feel very bad." Her voice sounded much closer, much more spontaneous. I allowed myself to open one eye and saw that she was lying on the edge of the bed and looking at me. "Then take an antacid," I grumbled. "I told you not to eat that shit at the airport." "No, that's not the point," she grinned. "Can you sleep down there?" "I tried until you turned on the light," I said, trying to sound stoic. "Well, if you can't do it on the floor, I think you can sleep in the bed," she said. "I can't force you to spend the whole night there." "Is it true?" Both my eyes opened. "Yes," she said. "Go." Not wanting to seem too keen on the idea, I slowly sat up, grabbed a pillow, and crawled at a snail's pace to the edge of the bed. I looked at her, dressed in a simple t-shirt and shorts. So simple, so unattractive, and yet so sexy. It took all my willpower not to smile widely. As I sat down, she grabbed a few extra pillows and began placing them in the middle of the bed. "What are you doing? What does it look like?" she said, continuing to build a wall of pillows. I laughed. "Do you really have so little faith in me? I'll let you sleep in the bed. Do not complain." "Do you think I'll start groping you in your sleep?" "I do not know. Maybe." "Throw away these pillows. You know you can trust me." She looked at me silently for a moment. I saw that she seemed to regret her invitation, but nevertheless, she relented and destroyed the barrier of pillows, unceremoniously throwing them on the floor.